At 15,000 feet, the pilot suddenly collapsed unconscious. The airplane started falling from the sky with nobody to control it. Passengers prepared to die. Then a tiny 6-year-old girl entered the cockpit and saved everyone by landing the plane. Nobody believed a kindergartner could fly. But she did. And everyone survived. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Emma was 6 years old and different from other children her age. While other kids played with dolls and watched cartoons, Emma spent her time reading books about airplanes and learning how planes work. This was not by accident. Emma's parents were both airplane pilots. Her mother's name was Sarah, and her father's name was Tom. They were commercial pilots who worked for a big airline. When Emma was born, her parents made an unusual choice. They could not afford to hire someone to take care of Emma every day. They also did not want to leave Emma with people they did not know. So they decided to bring Emma with them to work. The airline agreed to this arrangement because Emma's parents were very good pilots with long careers. Emma's father would sometimes take Emma into the airplane cockpit when her mother was not flying. Emma would sit in a special seat behind the pilots. From this seat, she could see everything that happened during flights. She watched her father's hands move across the controls. She listened to him talk to the airplane tower people. She heard all the technical words used by pilots. From the time Emma was a small baby, she heard words like altitude, throttle, descent, and heading. These words became as familiar to her as the words other children heard in nursery rhymes. As Emma grew from a baby to a toddler to a kindergarten student, she spent hundreds of hours in airplane cockpits. She watched takeoffs and landings. She saw how pilots handled normal flights and emergency situations. Emma had a special gift. She had what doctors called a photographic memory. This meant she could remember things with perfect clarity. She did not forget details. By the time Emma was 3 years old, she could name every instrument on an airplane. By age 4, she could recite emergency procedures from memory. By age 5, she understood how airplanes worked better than many adults who were learning to be pilots. However, Emma learned something important. She understood that adults did not take children seriously. When she tried to explain airplane things to her teacher at school, the teacher smiled and told her to talk about toys instead. When she corrected a person at the airport about airplane information, they laughed and said she had a good imagination. Emma's parents warned her about this. They told her that most people would not believe that a 6-year-old girl could know about flying airplanes. They asked her to keep her knowledge secret. So Emma learned to act like a normal child. She talked about princesses and her favorite colors. She played with toys and colored pictures. Nobody knew that behind her innocent eyes was a mind full of airplane knowledge. One day in April, Emma was flying alone for the first time. She was going to visit her grandmother in Seattle. Both her parents had to fly other airplanes that day, so neither could go with Emma. Her father talked to her before the flight. He made her repeat emergency procedures. He asked her to remember everything he taught her. Emma nodded and promised to be careful. Her mother packed her backpack with coloring books, toys, and snacks. She told Emma to be good and not to talk about airplanes to the flight attendants. Emma arrived at the airport dressed like any other 6-year-old. She wore bright purple ribbons in her hair and carried a pink backpack decorated with cartoon unicorns. She held a stuffed rabbit under her arm. A flight attendant named Lisa walked Emma to the airplane. Lisa spoke to Emma in a sing-song voice, as adults do with small children. "Are you excited to fly today?" Lisa asked, bending down to Emma's level. "Yes," Emma answered in a small, quiet voice. Lisa explained things about the airplane in simple words, as if Emma was just learning language. Other passengers smiled at the adorable little girl with her stuffed rabbit. An old man gave her candy. A woman told her she was very brave to fly alone. Emma thanked them politely and said sweet things. Nobody suspected anything unusual about this tiny girl. Lisa helped Emma to her seat, which was by the window. She fastened Emma's seatbelt carefully and showed her how to press the call button if she needed anything. She gave Emma a coloring book and crayons. The businessman next to Emma smiled and said she looked just like his own daughter. "She likes coloring too," he said. "Kids are so innocent at this age. Everything is princesses and ponies for them." Emma nodded and opened her coloring book. She started coloring carefully, staying within the lines. To everyone around her, she was just another small child on a routine flight. The flight took off smoothly. The airplane climbed into the clear morning sky. The landing gear came up with a sound Emma recognized. The airplane leveled off and began to cruise toward Seattle. Emma continued to color quietly in her book. Lisa brought her apple juice and cookies shaped like teddy bears. Emma thanked her and sipped her juice. In the cockpit, the captain's name was Richard Morrison. He had been flying airplanes for 30 years. He was very experienced and proud of his perfect safety record. The first officer was Jake Williams. He was responsible for helping Captain Morrison and monitoring systems. Captain Morrison had eaten a big breakfast that morning. He felt a small tightness in his chest. He thought it was indigestion from the heavy food. He took a tablet to help his stomach and did not tell First Officer Williams about it. He thought it was nothing serious. For 2 hours, the flight went smoothly. Everything was normal. The weather was clear. There were no problems. At 15,000 feet, when Seattle was still far away, something terrible happened. Captain Morrison suddenly felt a crushing pain in his chest. The tightness became much worse. It became impossible to breathe. The pain moved down his left arm. In a moment of clear thinking, Morrison knew what was happening. He was having a heart attack. His hand went to his chest. He tried to call out to First Officer Williams, but he could not speak. His body went limp. His hands fell away from the controls. He lost consciousness. First Officer Williams was looking at his computer when he heard a strange sound from Captain Morrison. He turned and saw his captain slumped in his seat, unconscious and unresponsive. His face was pale and sweaty. Williams knew immediately this was a serious medical emergency. "Captain! Captain!" Williams called out and shook him, but there was no response. Williams pressed the emergency call button for the flight attendants. His training took over, but fear was trying to take control of his mind. He had been trained for emergencies, but nothing had prepared him for this. He was now the only pilot flying the airplane. Lisa came running to the cockpit. She opened the door to find First Officer Williams desperately trying to help Captain Morrison while keeping control of the big airplane. "We have a medical emergency," Williams said, his voice shaking. "The captain is unconscious. I think he is having a heart attack. Do we have any doctors on board?" Lisa's face went white with fear. She ran back into the cabin and grabbed the speaker. Her hands were shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency on board," she announced. "If there is anyone on this airplane who is a doctor or nurse or medical professional, please press your call button immediately." The cabin became silent. Passengers looked at each other with worry. Several call buttons lit up. Lisa found a retired nurse, a medical student, and a dentist. None of them had experience with heart attacks at high altitude. They were not equipped to help properly. First Officer Williams told the air traffic control tower that he was declaring an emergency. "We need to land immediately," he said. "The captain is unconscious. We need to get down now." The controller answered with a calm, professional voice. "We understand your emergency. Colorado Springs Airport is the nearest. You have permission to descend immediately. Medical help will be waiting." Williams began the emergency descent. The airplane started to come down from the sky. Williams was overwhelmed. He had to fly the airplane. He had to help Captain Morrison. He had to talk to the tower. He had to manage the cabin crew. It was too much for one person. His hands were shaking on the controls. Sweat dripped down his face. He was scared. The retired nurse went to the cockpit and started to perform CPR on Captain Morrison. She pushed on his chest again and again. She was trying to save his life, but she did not know if it was working. Emma heard the announcement from her seat. She heard the word, medical emergency. She understood what this meant. One of the pilots was very sick. The other pilot had to fly the airplane alone. Emma knew from watching her parents that one pilot flying alone during an emergency was very dangerous. The workload was too much for one person. Emma's mind worked quickly. She thought about what she knew. She had watched her parents handle emergencies hundreds of times. She knew the procedures. She knew how to read the instruments. She knew how to talk to the air traffic control tower. She could help. She could reduce the workload for the pilot who was flying. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt quietly. The businessman next to her noticed. "Sweetie, you should stay in your seat," he said. "The seatbelt sign is on." But Emma was already moving down the aisle. Her stuffed rabbit was left on her seat. She walked toward the front of the cabin. Flight attendants were busy helping other passengers. Nobody paid attention to the small girl walking forward. She reached the cockpit door. Lisa was standing there, looking very upset and worried. She was trying to help First Officer Williams. She saw Emma standing there. "Honey, you need to go back to your seat," Lisa said. "This is not a good time for children to walk around." Emma looked at Lisa with her serious brown eyes. "I can help fly the plane," she said in a small, calm voice. Lisa almost laughed. "That is very sweet, but the grown-ups have this under control. Please go back to your seat." Emma did not move. "I know how to fly a Boeing 737, she said simply. "My parents are both captains. I have been in the cockpit since I was a baby. I can help." Her voice was so calm and so sure that Lisa stopped and looked at her carefully. Something about the way Emma spoke was different from before. She sounded like she actually knew what she was talking about. From inside the cockpit, First Officer Williams called out desperately, "Does anyone on this plane have any aviation experience? Anyone at all?" Emma raised her small hand. "I have aviation experience," she said clearly. Williams looked back and saw a tiny 6-year-old girl standing there. He felt confused and frustrated. This was not what he meant. He needed an adult. He needed someone experienced. "This is not funny," Williams said. "Who let a child up here? Someone get her back to her seat." But Emma did not flinch or move. She spoke clearly and calmly. "I am not joking. I have more than 2,000 hours watching 737 cockpit operations. My parents are Captain James Parker and First Officer Michelle Parker. I can identify every instrument on your panel. I can recite emergency procedures. I can help you." The cockpit became completely silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing. It seemed impossible. It seemed like something from a movie. A 6-year-old girl was standing there claiming she could fly an airplane. But something about the way she spoke made Williams pause. He heard confidence in her voice. He heard knowledge in her words. She was not acting like a scared child. She was acting like she actually understood what was happening. "You are 6 years old," Williams said, both not believing and desperately hoping. "I am 6 years and 4 months, Emma corrected. And I understand you are experiencing very high workload trying to manage this emergency alone. Captain Morrison appears to be having cardiac arrest. You need to fly the airplane, navigate to the airport, talk to air traffic control, and work with the cabin crew. That is too much for one person. This is called task saturation. I can help you with some of these tasks. The technical terms coming from the small child's mouth shocked Williams. This was not a child making things up. This was someone who actually understood aviation. What is that instrument? Williams asked, pointing to one of the many instruments on the panel. He pointed to the primary flight display. That is the primary flight display, Emma answered immediately without hesitation. It shows attitude, altitude, airspeed, vertical speed, and heading. The artificial horizon is the main reference. You are currently at 15,200 feet, airspeed 190 knots, heading 280 degrees. Williams felt his heart beat faster. A 6-year-old should not know these things. She should not be able to read instruments. But this small girl was reading them perfectly. What do you do if we lose cabin pressure? He asked. Emma answered without any pause, don the oxygen mask immediately. Establish aircraft control. Begin emergency descent to 10,000 feet or minimum safe altitude. Notify air traffic control. Make passenger announcement. If above flight level 250, maximum descent rate is 6,000 feet per minute until reaching 14,000 feet. Williams stared at Emma in amazement. She was speaking in perfect technical language. She was correct. She understood emergency procedures. Lisa looked at Williams with disbelief. You cannot seriously be thinking about letting a kindergarten child in the cockpit. This is crazy. This cannot be real. But Williams was making a decision. He had no choice. His captain was unconscious. He was overwhelmed. If this child really did know what she was claiming to know, she could help. Even theoretical knowledge was better than nothing. Can you reach the pedals? He asked Emma. No, my legs are too short, she said. But I do not need to fly the airplane. You can do that. I can handle radio communications. I can read checklists. I can monitor instruments. I can give you information. You fly the airplane. Williams nodded. Get in here. Sit on the jump seat and strap yourself in. Emma climbed onto the jump seat behind the first officer's position. The seat was far too large for her small body, but she fastened the harness with the skill of someone who had done it hundreds of times. Williams took a shaky breath. His hands held the controls. He called to air traffic control. We need immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport. The captain is unconscious. I have assistance from a passenger with aviation knowledge. He could not tell them his assistance was a 6-year-old girl. They would think he was crazy. The controller responded, nearest suitable airport is Colorado Springs. Turn to bearing 120. Descend to 12,000 feet. You will get vectors to landing soon. Medical help is standing by. Williams began the descent. The airplane came down through the sky. He looked back at Emma. Can you handle the radio for routine communications? He asked. Emma nodded. She reached for the microphone. Her small hand barely could grasp it. She transmitted her first message. Flight 447 descending to 12,000 feet, she said clearly. Her voice was unmistakably that of a young child, but her words were perfect and professional. There was a long pause from air traffic control. The controller was confused. He had heard a child's voice. But the message was correct and professional. Flight 447, please confirm. Who is transmitting? He asked carefully. Williams took the microphone back. This is First Officer Williams. I have a passenger with aviation knowledge helping with communications to reduce my workload during this emergency. I maintain full command authority and full control of the aircraft. Roger, Flight 447. Understand you have flight deck assistance. Colorado Springs frequency is 124.3. Emergency medical equipment will be standing by. Emma switched the radio to the new frequency. She checked in with Colorado Springs approach. Her small child's voice came through the speakers again, perfectly professional. Colorado Springs approach, Flight 447 with you. Descending through 14,000 for 12,000. In the cabin, passengers were scared and confused. Word had spread that a small child was somehow helping to fly the airplane. Some people were angry. Some people were terrified. They demanded to speak with flight attendants. They said this was dangerous and wrong. But the businessman from seat 12B, who had heard Emma's technical words firsthand, tried to explain to others what he had heard. "I know it sounds impossible," he said. But this girl was saying very technical things. She knew about procedures. Maybe she really does know something about flying. Others shouted at him and said it was all madness. Emma could hear the noise from the cabin, but she kept her focus on the instruments and the radio. She had trained her entire life for this, even though that training had been unofficial and natural. Her extraordinary memory allowed her to recall every emergency procedure she had watched her parents practice. Her thousands of hours of observation had given her understanding of airplane systems that would impress professional pilots if they could believe a 6-year-old possessed it. But Emma understood something important. She was not actually flying the airplane. First Officer Williams was doing that. He was moving the controls and steering the airplane. What Emma was doing was helping him think clearly. She was doing the secondary tasks that did not require hands-on control. She was like a verbal checklist. She was helping him manage his workload so he could focus on flying. Williams began to feel hope. Having Emma handle radio communications was genuinely helpful. It freed him to focus on the landing procedures and airplane management. He called back to Emma. "Give me the landing checklist," he said. Emma immediately began reciting from memory, landing checklist. Altimeters checked and set. Speed brake armed. Landing gear down and locked. On final flap set for landing. Before landing checklist complete. Her voice was clear and confident. Each item was in the right order. Williams felt relief. This was exactly what he needed. The retired nurse continued CPR on Captain Morrison. She was working hard to try to save his life. She called out, "He is not responding well. We need to land immediately." Williams nodded. The airplane was 10 minutes from Colorado Springs. He began the final descent. The airport came into view in the distance below. Emma continued to help. She called out altitude and airspeed. Her small voice remained steady as the airplane came down through the clouds. She read the instruments with perfect accuracy. She had watched her parents perform hundreds of approaches. The sequence was burned into her memory. Air traffic control gave new instructions: turn left, heading 090. Intercept the localizer. You are cleared for ILS approach to runway 15 right. Emma acknowledged perfectly, Roger. Left turn to heading 090. Cleared ILS approach runway 15 right. Williams made the turn. The airplane lined up with the landing path. Emma continued calling out critical information as the airplane descended. On localizer. Glide slope alive. 1,000 feet above minimums, she reported. The airplane descended smoothly. Williams flew with desperate precision. Emma provided the verbal support he needed. Her information helped him keep awareness of the airplane's position and speed. The landing gear came down with mechanical sounds. Emma called it out clearly, 3 green lights. Landing gear down and locked. Williams was too focused to respond, but he nodded. The runway appeared ahead. A long strip of concrete representing safety and survival. Williams flew the approach with shaking hands but with steady skill. He fought against the fear and pressure of the emergency. Emma continued, 500 feet above touchdown. Airspeed nominal. Descent rate good. Her ability to translate instrument readings into clear spoken information was extremely valuable. It allowed Williams to keep his eyes outside the window during the most critical final seconds. The airplane crossed over the runway threshold. Williams pulled the throttles to idle. The wheels touched down firmly but smoothly. Several passengers cried tears of relief. Speed brakes opened. Williams applied the brakes and steering. The airplane slowed down. 80 knots. 60 knots. 40 knots, Emma called out as the airplane decelerated. Flight 447 came to a safe stop on the runway. Emergency vehicles were racing toward them with lights flashing and sirens sounding. The moment the airplane stopped, the cabin exploded into applause and cries. Passengers released all the fear and tension they had been holding inside. Some people were crying. Some people were laughing. Everyone was just happy to be alive. Williams set the parking brake with shaking hands. He shut down the engines. Then he turned to look at Emma, still strapped in a jump seat, her small legs dangling, her face calm and serious. "How?" he simply asked. "My parents trained me my whole life," Emma said simply. "They never thought I would need to actually use it. But they taught me everything." Emergency medical workers rushed onto the airplane. They immediately began caring for Captain Morrison. They prepared him for transport to the nearest hospital. The retired nurse had kept him alive with CPR. Now professional medical people took over. First Officer Williams gave his statement to emergency workers. His voice was still shaky as he explained what happened and how they managed to land safely. When he mentioned that a 6-year-old passenger had assisted with cockpit operations, the emergency workers looked at him as if he had hit his head. But Lisa and other witnesses confirmed the story. Soon Emma found herself surrounded by confused emergency workers and airport officials who could not understand how a tiny girl with pigtails could have done such technical things. Emma answered their questions politely, but she was very tired now. The excitement and adrenaline were wearing off. She looked every bit the small child she was. News of the incident spread very quickly. By the time passengers got off the airplane and went into the terminal, news cameras and reporters were already arriving at Colorado Springs Airport. They had heard about the emergency on aviation radio. The story seemed too incredible to be true. A 6-year-old girl helping to land a commercial airplane after the captain had a heart attack. Initial reports were met with skepticism and even mockery. Many people thought it was exaggerated or misreported. But as more details emerged, as First Officer Williams gave interviews and passengers confirmed the account, and as audio recordings of Emma's communications with air traffic control became available, skepticism changed to amazement. That small, unmistakably childish voice on the radio recordings, speaking perfect aviation terminology and demonstrating clear understanding of complex procedures, was impossible to dismiss or explain away. Emma's parents received emergency notifications while flying their own routes. They immediately took leave from work and rushed to Colorado Springs. When they finally reached their daughter several hours later, they found her sitting in an airport office eating chicken nuggets. She was surrounded by FAA investigators, airline officials, and media relations personnel, all trying to understand what happened. Emma's mother swept her into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Emma's father stood in stunned silence. He was trying to process that his daughter had been in a real emergency and had used the knowledge they had taught her. They had always known Emma was special. They had always understood that her memory went far beyond normal childhood development. But they had never imagined she would actually need to use this knowledge in a life-threatening situation. The investigation that followed was extensive and unprecedented. The FAA launched an inquiry not just into the emergency, but into the broader questions raised by Emma's involvement. Aviation psychologists were brought in to evaluate Emma's capabilities. They conducted tests and interviews that confirmed she did indeed possess extraordinary knowledge of aviation procedures and aircraft systems. This knowledge was the result of years of learning through observation combined with her extraordinary memory abilities. The recordings of her communications during the emergency were analyzed by experts. Every single transmission was technically correct and professionally delivered. First Officer Williams was interviewed many times. He consistently said that Emma's assistance had been invaluable in reducing his workload during the critical emergency. He said her help had likely contributed to the successful outcome. Captain Morrison survived his cardiac event thanks to the quick response and successful emergency landing. After recovering enough to speak, he joined everyone else in praising Emma's extraordinary assistance. He admitted he had no memory of the actual emergency. The retired nurse who performed CPR also spoke publicly. She said she was very impressed by the small girl's composure and technical competence during the crisis. Passengers who had initially been terrified by the idea of a child in the cockpit found themselves re-evaluating their reactions. Many later expressed gratitude and amazement that Emma had been on their flight. The businessman from Seat 12B gave many interviews. He described how he watched Emma color like any normal child and then hours later heard her speaking like a trained aviation professional. He called it one of the most startling things he had ever witnessed. The story captured global attention. News organizations worldwide covered the miracle child pilot story. Emma became an overnight sensation. However, the attention was not all positive. Critics raised serious concerns about having a child on the flight deck during an emergency. They argued that regardless of the outcome, it represented dangerous decision-making and violated numerous regulations and protocols. Legal experts debated whether First Officer Williams had acted appropriately. Some said he should face disciplinary action for allowing a minor into the cockpit during flight operations. Child safety advocates expressed concerns about the pressure and stress Emma had been exposed to. They argued that no 6-year-old should be in such a position, regardless of their capabilities. The airline faced potential liability questions. They struggled to craft public statements that addressed the concerns while acknowledging the positive outcome. Emma herself seemed remarkably unaffected by all the attention. In interviews conducted with child psychologists present, she spoke matter-of-factly about what had happened. She explained that she had simply helped with things she knew how to do while the grown-up pilot did the actual flying. She showed no signs of trauma. She seemed to view the entire incident as a practical application of knowledge she had absorbed throughout her young life. When asked if she had been scared, Emma thought about it seriously. She said she had been a little nervous, but mostly she had just been focused on helping because that was what needed to happen. After several months, the FAA released its findings. The report acknowledged that First Officer Williams had faced an unprecedented emergency situation and had exercised judgment that resulted in a successful outcome with no injuries beyond the captain's medical event. The report noted that while the presence of an unsupervised minor on the flight deck technically violated regulations, the extraordinary circumstances and Williams' maintenance of command authority throughout the incident meant that disciplinary action was not warranted. The report also noted that Emma Parker's unique background and capabilities represented an extreme outlier that was unlikely to be replicated. Therefore, the incident should not be used to establish broader policy regarding passenger assistance during emergencies. The airline settled quietly with passengers who filed complaints and implemented additional protocols for flight deck access during emergencies. Emma's story continued to resonate for years afterward. It became a case study in aviation training programs. It prompted discussions about crisis decision-making, non-traditional resources during emergencies, and the intersection of knowledge and authority. Emma eventually grew older, and her early fame faded into a remarkable footnote in aviation history. Her parents continued their careers as pilots. However, they never again brought their daughter into cockpits during flights. That chapter of their unusual family life had closed with dramatic finality. Emma pursued education with the same intense focus she had demonstrated in the cockpit. Her extraordinary memory and analytical ability served her well academically. Whether she would eventually pursue aviation professionally remained to be seen. But the little girl who had helped save Flight 447 would always carry with her the knowledge that when crisis had called, she had been ready to answer, even at just 6 years old. The incident raised profound questions that extended beyond aviation. It challenged assumptions about childhood capabilities and the rigid categories society places on age-appropriate knowledge and responsibility. It demonstrated that knowledge acquisition could happen through observation and immersion in ways that formal education might not capture. It showed that in truly desperate circumstances, help might come from the most unexpected sources. It showed that dismissing someone based on age or appearance could mean overlooking crucial resources. Emma's case became a reminder that human potential could manifest in extraordinary ways. It showed that sometimes the most unlikely heroes could emerge when circumstances demanded it. The little girl with purple ribbons and a stuffed rabbit had proved that competence and courage were not solely the domain of adults. Her story would inspire conversations about education, child development, and emergency response for generations to come. Several days after the incident, Emma finally completed her journey to Seattle. She sat in her grandmother's living room, finally able to just be a child again. She colored quietly in a new coloring book her grandmother had bought for her. The television played news coverage of the story, but Emma had stopped paying attention to it. She was just happy to be with her grandmother, eating cookies and drawing pictures, being the 6-year-old child she was. Her stuffed rabbit sat beside her. When her grandmother asked what she wanted to do the next day, Emma suggested they go to the park and feed the ducks. Because despite having helped land a commercial aircraft during a medical emergency, despite all the interviews and attention and extraordinary circumstances, Emma Parker was still fundamentally a little girl. She liked coloring books and stuffed animals and feeding ducks at the park. She had simply also happened to possess knowledge that most 6-year-olds would never have. Knowledge that had been desperately needed for one critical half hour at 15,000 feet over Colorado. The world would remember her for that remarkable moment. But Emma herself would remember the cookies at her grandmother's house and the purple ribbons in her hair and the simple joy of being 6 years old.